Hi, my name is Benedict for Higher Hertz. In this issue of the video, we are looking at purity. Purity is a bit of an interesting one, so we will have some discussion around the bigger picture here to help you place and locate it. But basically, purity is a ROMpler. So it's a whole collection of sounds, kind of like all the sounds that you might need to put together a track. And that as such makes it an interesting and slightly unusual contender in the market. Purity came out, I should have done the research to find out exactly when, but it could easily be 15 or so, maybe even closer to 20 years ago. I remember trying the thing when it first came out. There was Ravity, which was a sort of single sound version of this. There was a freeware, which is still available in 32-bit effects module. So the sound effects from in here, like your phases, choruses, delays, what have you, was put out as a little module, which I actually used quite a lot. It made me see these guys very positively, so when Purity came out, it was like, oh, that's very interesting, and that fills a hole. It's always been on the edge of chatter, but kind of never been it. Interestingly enough, in doing research for this, I see that in the last year it started to become a thing of chatter again. I think some rappers have picked it up. Mostly it seems to be within that rapper EDM space, quite different from the world in which I live. And that's interesting to see. While this is a bit of a funny device, I think it's well worth the discussion because there's a lot that this has got right, which is why it still manages to be on sale so far after its release. As we can see, it has had a recent update, so apparently it will play on the new Apple M1s until they do a software update. Oh, did I say that out loud? $49 is the price, and while in some ways $49 may seem high for something of this vintage and of this style, I think if we look sideways and look at the big picture, I can still see why, in the right situation, that could well be $49.99 well spent. Before we go a lot further, let's actually have a look at the environment in which this is a relevant or not relevant thing. These sounds are not going to be the best sounds that you ever find. And nor was a ROMpler intended necessarily to be that way. They started out as keyboards where you could go out on stage and have all the sounds that you'd need for just about any sound that you're going to need to play. So you'd have a good collection of pianos, electric pianos, a good collection of organs, and some guitars, and maybe some saxophones, and some strings, and pianos and strings. So you could do your big love ballads, and basically everything that you might need. And commonly they got into drum sets, just a good all-round set of things that you would need. And in many ways, while people often mistakenly took those to be release sounds, most often they were used as scratch pad. And I've attached a track to the end of this, a song that I co-wrote with Jake, who you might have met last video. And so I needed scratch pad sounds. I knew that a lot of those sounds were going to get replaced, but that allowed me to have access to them to get the song written so that he could write his words and we could put it together. That's a lot of what these sorts of sounds are about. There's no reason you can't take them to release, but if you come in with that strange modern mindset of that the first note that you press should be deserving of a Grammy Award because it sounds so, then you will have difficulties making music all round. We look at the environment, especially back when this came out, there were little to no things in the VST world that gave you the equivalent of that keyboard, whether that be a Roland Pro or a Technics Semi-Pro. There kind of was nothing in the VST world that gave you a one box that gave you everything that you need. Some DAW manufacturers were starting to build sound sets, but many weren't, and many still haven't. And so Purity fitted into this potential hole. Whether there was enough of a hole to justify it's a whole other thing, but it's actually still here, it hasn't gone to abandonware. Let's look at its competitors, because everything has to have competitors, but initially I really did struggle with the concept of who are the direct competitors, because in many ways the competitors are not direct. The ones that you will hear, especially if you're watching those videos by rappers using Fruity Loops and what have you, is that they'll talk about Xpand. Xpand by Air. Air started building this, and it was part of the Pro Tools thing. So Pro Tools included this one box ROMpler, like Purity, that gave you a bit of everything that you might need to at least scratch pad, if not actually get out the door, any tracks that you're working on. Pro Tools was light on in the MIDI environment at the time, but people were starting to use it, and so Xpand was pretty well taken. A lot of people did bypass that and just move to the whole Native Instruments, Komplete, Kontakt kind of thing. When you look at the prices, though, from 300, there's a noticeable difference between 50 and 300. If you want to feel like you're getting more stuff, and it's always about the upsell, and you need to watch this, then you're easily at the $600. And Kontakt is $600 for a sampler. Now you get a whole pile of sounds. I haven't actually looked at Kontakt head on, but I've got a couple of environments to run, and it's obviously a powerful beast. But you're always encouraged to be getting into complete bundles, and that's thousands and thousands of dollars. And while the sounds definitely will get you to release, they're not as perfect, ready to go in a mix as people think. And I know this because as a mix engineer, I get a lot of them all the time. And some of them I actually have to fix. I've talked about having to de-stereo guitars. Not guitars, although that can be a problem too, but having to de-stereo drums. And they've often come out of the Komplete or Kontakt environment. The other one that you'll hear about is Nexus. I think there's one called Heat and what have you. There are a few of these things that catered very much. They push themselves at a particular market and they make me uncomfortable. But that one, you see, is $250. And then they're constantly trying to sell you $30 sound packs on top of that. That seems very focused on, well, genre and subgenre. That's fine, but the problem with that is that you will be winding the wheel using the same sounds as everybody else. So your options to say, okay, if I'm going to get one box that kind of gives me all the sounds that I'm likely to need to cover the usual suspects and maybe a few outside, then we're looking at large amounts of money. And on some respects, that's actually a really good thing. Oh, there's one I did forget. I better show this as well. Because we've talked about the Roland Cloud, the XV5080 is a similar thing. This is a classic ROMpler. This was the box that you could take on stage and have everything. A lot of these sounds did end up on records and in films, as we talked about. That's another possibility, but you're looking at, I think it's $250. I think if you want to buy a license or $20 a month or whatever, either way, there's still a significant cost in that. There's also the cost that these are the exact sounds that everybody else is using, and that is pretty common too, whether you're looking at the Roland thing or Xpand or Nexus, and to a fair extent Kontakt as well. Look at your DAW library. If you have one, and if that's good enough, it might do the job. If you don't have one, and as I've said, many DAWs don't have much in the way of a sound library, then you've got to look at something else. And do you have the money, and is it the right time to invest that much in something? In which case, if it's not, then you may find that something like Purity is a good beginner to get you there. Before we get into this, let's look at my good and bad on the device. What's good is that there are a lot of useful sounds. A lot of them are also laid out in the general MIDI format. That's a format that's not much of a big deal anymore, but if you do pick up a MIDI file, it should be laid out in general MIDI, and GM will automatically assign those sounds within Purity if you've got it right, if they've got it right, because not all MIDI files are built properly, and you should automatically have workable sounds ready to go to hear what's happening. And in theory, you should be able to bang them into place. And technically, release it. It may not be the best sounding thing, but it should be doable. That's your scratch pad. That was the whole idea. There are a lot of useful sounds in here, plus you can actually make your own. It's got nice options for layering. And when we talked about the Roland sound, a lot of that was built on layering 2, 4 separate synths playing on top of each other, creating a lot more depth. Oh, if you're hearing the hiss, that's just the demo silence and hiss from Purity. There is a cool, simple synth in here. It's not a super powerful synth, but if you look at that as a bonus or a part of the $50, then you are getting a synth that's actually got quite a nice quirky character to it and can deliver some rather good things, especially once you get used to its intricacies. It's not an intricate or difficult synth, but it has its moments. The effects are useful. You know that most times I'm like, turn them off, turn them off, turn them off, about onboard effects. But these are actually useful. Remember I said I actually used to use these extracted effects in my mix. And if they were a 64-bit version of the effects VST, I'd have a look at it again, and they might get back into release tracks again. The bad. Physically, it is small. This is because it was built 1,000 years ago, and screens have gotten bigger, therefore things that have changed the same pixel size have gotten smaller. It's, however, not terrible to work with. If you're on 4K, it will be a problem. But on a 1080 screen, it's okay. It would be nice if it could be updated to modernize that. The sounds can be a bit flat or thin. That's because they are small samples. The whole download is fairly small, and that's actually one of its advantages. It's quite CPU efficient. Well, I think it's very CPU efficient. And it's a small RAM footprint. So if you're running on an older machine, you're not going to be going, oh, geez, I need to buy a whole lot more RAM or faster hard drives or whatever just to make this thing work. When you get into big sample libraries, Spitfire libraries and stuff like that, while it's fantabulous, the problem is that you need a lot of RAM and fast drives to make it work. You often need dedicated SSDs to make them run without clogging your workflow down to just like waiting. This is really instant. And that's a nice thing about it. It's a scratch pad. It'll give you everything you need straight away, almost as though you have, let's not say a Roland, but it's almost as though you have a fairly nice, reasonably modern Yamaha Portasound or Casio keyboard that's got all these things inside right there in your box. Biggest difficulty is just that its age is showing, and it'd be nice if they could give it an overall modernize to make it bigger, maybe make it easier to scale, although that means a complete rewrite, and that's probably not financially worth it, but just some way to kind of make it bigger. That's probably the main thing. There are a few kooky things which we'll discuss as we go through, but nothing to stop you from using it. Let's have a look at the device in general. So we turn it on, it defaults to this. As we see, we have 4 layers. So let's... Any effects you hear are actually on board. I debated, do I use my general overall effects? And I thought, no, let's be fair. These effects are okay. Let's largely keep people hearing what is there. Speaking of, let's also do the housekeeping. This is prone to sounding a little thin, so I will give you tips right up front for how to improve it, and we're going to run that way. The first thing that we can do, and these are things that we should be doing in any mix, but we'll kind of notice, if with all effects and everything turned off, yes, we've lost a lot of level. I've used a compressor to bring those up. So if we push it into a compressor, dropout, audio, demo. Nice, pushing it into a compressor means that we can bulk that sound up a little bit. That's probably a thing you're going to be doing anyway. The next thing you'd look at doing, I would advise, is probably using some kind of tape unit. Nothing fancy. You see so many tape units that are coming out at the moment, and they're just ridiculous, absurd, and they often don't even sound any good. This is not about getting wobble or that's up to you, but it's not going to make this sound better. A little bit of this just adds a little bit of saturation, a little bit more body. We can get into using a little bit of compression into here too, but I'm not going to. It's subtle. You might need headphones or good monitors and be well positioned to hear the difference, but it does add more sparkle and life to the sound. It's still going to be on the thin side though. But this is a thing that you can do. Grab a delay unit, depending upon how it's constructed, but try to get the cleanest delay unit that you can, but one that has an option for modulation or wobble of some kind. Now, in this case, I've turned the delay time to 0 and feedback to 0 and mix to 100%. If you go in between, you're adding chorusing, and that might be okay, but that's not what we want here. We want the sounds to come out pure, but to have a little bit added to them. Now, in this case, we've got that wobble parameter. So that's wow, flutter, what have you. And that's... we don't want it to sound like that, but a tiny bit that you really can't hear, you will still feel. If you happen to have echo bowed, then you can do the same thing with that fella. And that is a common thing that I use on particularly drums that come to me. This isn't actually pitch shifting, it's frequency shifting. So it's changing the spectral action. So off. Doesn't always sound lovely on its own. You've got to find the right way. I've been far too quick with that. But again, 100% wet mix, just that little bit of movement of how the frequency spectrum is sitting there, moving around, will keep it fresh in the ear. But your delay trick will work very, very nicely. You shouldn't be able to consciously hear it. As soon as you're hearing that, oh, I'm a drunk lo-fi hipster, you've gone too far. But that adds a lot of nice things. And then, of course, just another round of saturation. So off. The big one's the compressor, because adding level. And now we've got a pretty full, usable sort of sound. That's pretty darn nice. Now, one of the advantages of a sound that's a little on the thinner side is it's actually easier to fit in a mix. And that's one of the reasons why sounds of this era tended to be sort of simple and thin, because if you were going to get a MIDI file with 16 tracks all hammering away at once, and all of those sounds were like enormous, dude, you couldn't get them to play together without some serious issues. Here, you can pick particular parts, sort of spectral activity in any of these, pile them up, and you get a nice sound. So that's a pretty important part of it. You can run this as one multi-timbral device, in which case different tracks can send different channels. Doesn't work that way in Reason. Or you can run it and pile up layers. I thought I read somewhere that you could only pile up 4, but it seems to allow me to pile up a phenomenal number. So let's pull in something else. Who doesn't need electric bass? Okay, so it doesn't seem to be limited to 4. It seems that you can pile up an enormous number of things. We can also take each of these parts, transpose it however we want, so plus 1, 2, 3, 4 octaves, minus 1, 2, 3, 4 octaves, or semitones as well, which can get a little interesting. We can choose which art it goes to, a main art or a sub art. So sub arts, yeah, it's a bonus. Really only necessary if you're using the one with multi-temporal, but nonetheless, it's nice that it has it. Didn't play with it, assume it works. We've also got the chorus and reverb built in, so we can assign brilliant. And as I said, they're really quite nice effects. Okay, you've got to get a little bit used to how it moves around the library. Because we've chosen a sound in bass, it's now going, oh, well, I'm in the bass library. So if I choose something in the guitar library, I'm in the guitar library. It makes sense, and it's kind of cool. None of these other things are playing now. We could have them playing, but we're not hooked up, so it's best not to. We'll work our way through the libraries. You've got presets, so you've got access to a whole pile of presets. You've got the general MIDI sounds, so they're your basic sounds. They often play outside their actual range, but they work. It's a little bit tonguey for my liking, but there are other versions. Banjo, who doesn't want a banjo? And some of the usual. You've got the general MIDI rhythm sounds. So these are just standard drum kits with general MIDI assigned. So if you've already got drums written in a general MIDI format, which Power Drum Kit and I think Stephen Sladen, most of them are assigned to general MIDI keys, then you could drop these in and they will still work. A lot of the components are shared, so your drums and your kick and snare are changed. There are also these. There are called motive sounds. I didn't look a lot at what they are, but they have their charms. There are phrases. So they are sequences with one or many sounds which you can drop in as parts in a piece. You obviously want to be a little bit careful, but there are drum loops and stuff as well, which you can play at the wrong pitch. I don't know whether I'd be using any of them as my main drum lines, but as character drum lines, sitting around other drums could be kind of cool. Then we get into the actual patch libraries. I get the feeling that some of these may be the same as what's in the GM, but at the same time I get the feeling that they're not exactly the same. They probably share sample sets. So you've got all these kits. Now, none of these are, again, the greatest drum kits that you're going to hear, but they're actually kind of cool. They do work. You may need to process them to get them to sit nicely, but you generally tend to do that with everything. Pianos, that's that. Led with an organ, bit strange. The layers are okay, but you'd want to set them up to suit your needs. I've heard far worse piano sounds in nice mixes. People will say, oh, but so-and-so's piano is so much better. Yeah, but you've got to spend a pile of money to get this thing, and then it's separate. It's another box that you've got to plug into your track as you're working. So not saying don't get great piano libraries. If piano is really important to you, get great piano libraries. But you don't need a great piano library to get working. Because one of the great things with the piano is it's about how you play it, not what the sound is. So if you play well, you can play one of these interesting sorts of sounds. And it will work really, really well. Clavinets. So that's Stevie Wonder, or pretty sure Fleetwood Mac used them quite a bit. You can hear the effects being used there. It's a nice sound. I would find a home for that. That's really cool. That's real. If you leave me now. Yeah, I think that's a great sound. It's not going to sit in every situation, but you find the right situation, it'll sit real nice and things like that. So quite a good collection of pianos. We've got organs, starting with accordions, which always sound unfortunate on. Some things respond to mod wheel, some don't. We'll show you how. Bagpipes. Blue Jimmy. B3 type stuff. And with different rates of Leslie, because you don't have a huge amount of control on that. Nice big cathedral organ. Sounds like a pump organ. B3 type stuff. Or your basic B3 kinds of sounds. But when you need to be John Lord, so it's using the flute sample. Cool. Got bells and percussions. That's nice. People go, how tacky is that? But I think it's a tacky attitude. Because these things are very, very useful in mix. You can give yourself a nice little motif. I've just mixed a track which is super. And it's actually got some really, well, basic Casio keyboard sounds in there. And they become a really important little motif in the track. I've kept them dry as and pushed forward. And they have this great charm that you go, oh, isn't that cool? So one of those obviously has an arpeggiator working. Bass is always a little bit tricky, but largely strange upright bass. But if you know how to compose a bass part and you know how to mix a bass part, because you can have a great bass part that's played, but if it's not mixed right, it'll die. Which is part of why you shouldn't let the bass player tell the mix engineer how to mix, because he'll wreck it. That's a bit of a strange sound. I use one of these electric bass sounds in Falling Down in Love that you'll hear on the end of this. So right situation, you find the right sound. They can be a little inconsistent from one octave to another across sounds, but you learn to live with that. Our guitars that we were looking at before. No modulation wheel assigned to that, but harmonics are nice. If you're working with a guitar sample and you want it to seem a little bit more realistic, you can pop in some harmonics. There are some I've heard worse electric guitars. I've used worse electric guitars. If you don't like the drive that's on them, because I think that's happening in the box, you can always take it off and start again. So you probably want to go and adjust your envelopes, your synth section, which we'll look at later. Strings. Nice. Ping a little bit at the beginning, but you can always change that. Strange combo. Nice. Right situation, that would sound super. Velocity control is fairly nicely set up on a lot of these. I'd be wanting to adjust how that seems to end, either just by changing their envelopes or with the delays and reverbs. Gets into some synth string sounds too. Really nice sounds. Brass, as usual, is a bit of a grab bag, but it's always a weakness. That's quite usable. You've got to find how to use them as well. That's nice. That's classic synthesis brass. Real mix kind of stuff. trombone, trumpet. Simple, but quite a nice sound. Woodwind. Saxophones are always a nightmare as samples. But the bassoons are nice. Nice with a bit of vibrato. Usable sound. Simple, but usable. If you get nice notes, mix it nicely, it will work. These get into synths. The synth is prone to going into overdrive. You do have to learn to manage that. It at times has this really great sort of year 2000 virtual analog sound to it. But I've always thought it sounded quite nice. If I were a lucky man. Synth bass stuff. And again, I believe these are all using inbuilt synth. Yeah, it's very early 2000s. Fast synth just means they're synths with a faster attack. Slow synths are more pads. And with care, this is capable of making some really nice sounds like that. Then you've got things that are arpeggiated. So if you grabbed a slow synth, what was nice? I think it was that one. Maybe do some off-board processing. You've got a really nice usable sound. I think this bank is stuff built by somebody, so it's a signature bank. Is what I think. But there's some nice stuff. It shows you how you can take what's in here and really create something of your own. Then there are user banks, so you can save off your own sounds. So while I've spent a lot of time on that, it sort of lets you see through the sounds, but also to understand how it works. So you can have any single sound, and then you can layer them up, which makes them far richer and far more interesting. There is a sequence. I have not even tried this, but obviously it's fairly capable because we've heard sequenced things. There's then the ability to edit any of these. So I click on what I'm editing, and there it comes up. In this place it doesn't sound, but there we go. There we go. There's my analogs pad. So if I want to, I might say, okay, gee, that analog pad's a little bit loud. Pull it back. I might say I want to pan that to the side. In which case I can do that. You can actually put values in here, I believe. I read it in the manual, never tried it. You can assign how many voices or whether you want that to be in legato mode. In which case, let's give us some glide time. Brilliant. Couldn't have done better myself. So that's nice to be able to assign. You can transpose, so we can go. Let's turn off the glide. Choose arts, chorus, reverb. So they're the obvious suspects. You've also got access to some inbuilt effects. Let's turn off our piano for now. So filters. Mix fully. That seems to be a high pass filter. Compressors, I don't know whether those compressors are good or not. I wouldn't expect them to be. Auto wah, you'll be able to hear that easily, no doubt. So it biggens our sound quite nicely, pushes it back. Second bank, same options as before, but workable. They're just workable effects. The main thing that we can really do though is, if we come here, we've got access to 2 oscillators. And we can pick and choose any of the samples, which are equally put into sections, and then basic waveforms. So we can have any of these. I know I always grab the MG saw. Let's just turn. Let's not have anything happen on that for the moment. Turn off our phaser and our chorus reverb. So just straight pure sound. We've got our standard envelopes. They don't have knobs, they just have these things, and that's how it works. Velocity amount. Filter. It is a very fiery filter. And you can hear some stepping as well, but I never let those things get in the way. If it sounds cool, it is. You can move between low or high pass, and then you've got access to your envelope. Assign velocity tracking, and assign to the LFO. And velocity to the amount of the filter envelope. Although it might be to cut off, it kind of goes negative. We can put in a shared chorus and reverb. Let's put back in that phaser. Because who doesn't like a phaser? And a bit of chorus after a phaser never hurt anyone. You do have to watch your levels because you can hear it spit and click a little bit. If we now bring in our other analog pad, actually we want to bring that one down and that one up. Looks like I pressed a feature there. Not quite sure what that one is. The manual's actually pretty good. You can also, and let's turn off one of those, automate things. Initially I thought, yeah, I can't really automate things. Some things are easy to find. Right click, you can assign them to a MIDI controller. If you write down with your MIDI stuff, you know exactly what that is. If not, don't worry about it too much. You can learn controllers, but you can also assign to all these slots. Initially, it's confusing. It says not assigned, and then you go to your modulation system in your DAW, and you go, not assigned. What's wrong with that? Let's assign it to, let's assign our level to 7. Now, if we go into our DAW, and this is up to you, if we open up our thing, we can see there is our level. That's already there. Brilliant. So now it's actually assigned. If we go back and have a look here, we can see that it's been assigned to something, and we can forget it as well. Okay, so let's forget that. Undo, delete automation lane. Let's do this. We right-click the knob, nothing happens. So initially I was thinking, oh, this is pretty poor for automation. You can't really automate much at all, and that's a bit of a killer. However, if you click the word, up comes our thing. Let's have it forget because it knew something. We don't want it to know that. Let's go with 01. I can go back into here. Well, I might even be able to automate. Let's see if that works. No, it doesn't. And that's fine. I wouldn't necessarily expect that to work in Reason with such an old instrument. So we've assigned that to 1. That's its current level. Let's go low so it doesn't glitch too much. Woohoo, look at it fly. And that gives us a layer of movement that will make any sound that seems a wee bit flat suddenly start to come alive. Let's lift it a little bit. That's really nice that it's got this very nice, quite characterful, but functional little virtual analog synth built right in. We could also take our sound and make it snappy. Turn on the Arpeggiator. Patterns up, the rate. So it's still responding to our... Let's bring back in our pad. Let's set our velocity amounts to be roughly the same. And if you want to manage your separate parts here, like your levels, pans, voices, transpositions, chorus and reverb amounts, we can do it all on the front panel. Setup gives you some general controls, and save would be to if we wanted to save things. That's essentially the whole device. It does have a few other bits and pieces it does, but that's really rather cool in that we've got a set of workable scratch pad sample sounds and then this rather characterful little VA synth in there as well, and that we can mix and match those things. So compared to, let's say, the JV XV 5080 at a couple $100 or $20 a month or whatever, and this, while they're not exactly in the same quality place as each other, they're surprisingly similar. And there are some cool things that this will do that the JV doesn't, and vice versa. So at $50, not the coolest thing that you're going to buy. You're probably not going to buy it and then go telling all your friends how down you is for getting purity. But if you're prepared to put the work into it, the time and the energy, it's actually a really rather cool thing. And it's obviously held out over the test of time, despite its limits. They see the demand still. They're obviously selling enough of it to actually make it work on an M1 chip. So limits, other alternatives, but little in the market that's quite like this device. And that I actually like. I like it more in many ways now, 15, 20 years after the fact, than I did at the time when I was looking elsewhere. But it's a cool thing. They've got some bits that are very, very right, some bits that are a little bit, but nothing enough to actually make you say, that sucks or that's not worth it. If you're thinking it sucks and it's not worth it, then you're either looking in a different direction and this is just not what you're after, and that's okay. Or your head's in the wrong place and you're not putting the time and energy in because you've fallen for this trap that your sounds should be winning you Grammy Awards by the first time that you put your mouse on Fruity Studio. And that ain't the way that music gets made. Speaking of the way that music gets made, I will finish up here and then I will actually add two pieces which I revoiced, and they were done in one session quite quickly. They could be better, but they were done in one session quite quickly because a demo doesn't allow me to save things. The first one is Falling Down in Love. It is the rough writing version, so it's not the final version. The final version we actually sat down and mixed yesterday and sounds great. This version that you're going to hear is essentially the first version, but rather than using the default sounds that I pulled out of Reason, I've replaced everything I can, everything except the acoustic guitars. And I would have done the acoustic guitars, except they were programmed inside of the devices that were used, and even exporting the MIDI does not give you the same result as what you hear from the Strumulator thing. Otherwise, everything you hear is purity. That gives you an idea of, out of the box, how it might sound if you didn't put a lot of energy into processing it. I largely left all the mix decisions that were already there. So it was a case of pull out the original, put in purity, yep, that's working, and move along. The second piece that you will hear is actually one of my own from my forthcoming record called Many Moons. This is a track that I just grabbed it and said, okay, that'll probably work, and applied Purity sounds. The original is written with handmade synth sounds, and this was just bloop, drop it in. I hadn't worked out how the automation works, so it could have been smoother with automation and more time. But I didn't have access to either at the time. Knowing that automation was there, I would have done it. But it still works as a musical idea, but possibly wouldn't be ready for release unless we were going to make it more chiptune-y. Benedict for Higher Hertz, if you have questions, ask them on down below, preferably after hitting the Subscribify Me button there so that you can stay in the loop with what we're doing. If you are interested, grab the demo, spend some time with it. I'd hate to see anyone rush out and buy it just going, oh, well, this is going to be the greatest thing ever, unless that's commitment, in which case go for it, be committed. But spend some time with it, work out how it works, how it can benefit you. And I still think that there is a really nice contender in here that's just focusing on pure, what we might call bread and butter sounds with some really nice jam on top, or jelly if you're American, without focusing on trying to draw you into a whole lot of rather dubious stuff, because a lot of the more direct competitors, I don't necessarily love the market that they're trying to draw you into. So you have a great day, have a listen through the pieces where Purity is doing its job.
Love is on my mind. It bleeds me from inside, then leaves me out to dry. I think about it still, the passion and the thrill of climbing up that hill to something I can feel, a place to call my own. Days I find like the rain, I'm falling down, always falling down in love. Take me in your arms and lead me with your charms. You shelter me from harm, but then it goes